Welcome. I hope you all can hear me. Awesome. If you don't have a headset on, put it on. Thanks for joining. I want to start with a quick question. So today we're in Las Vegas. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe you all went to the gaming tables yesterday or maybe this morning. But if you didn't, think back to a week ago, a normal Tuesday, you're at home. My question for you all is, how many of you carry more than like $20 in your pocket on a given Tuesday? So we got a handful of folks who like cash still, but I think most of us don't anymore, right? Look, I'm not a shopper. I have a pretty standard wardrobe. You'll see me, I'll wear pink pants pretty much every day and a linen shirt. I'm not a sneakerhead. I don't go shopping for game consoles. I'm not a big concert goer. The one thing that my wife and I are really into, though, is travel. So we do a lot of travel, and we do it last minute. And when you're booking last minute travel, the challenge is that when you go to buy a ticket, there might only be 2 seats left on a plane, right? And so we're booking a last minute trip. The worst thing that could possibly happen to us is we go to click buy, we put in our credit card information, we go to confirm that payment, right? And we get a declined transaction. And we know we have the credit limit to make the purchase, but we call the bank, the issuing bank, and we find out there's actually just a technical issue. And now by the time technical issue is corrected, I go back to make that purchase, I can no longer fly, right? Seats are gone, my vacation is up, I'm no longer going to Nassau to sit on the beach in the Bahamas. Instead, I'm in Las Vegas, I'm at reInvent, I'm presenting to you all. Jokes aside about missing reInvent, or missing the beach, I guess, and coming to reInvent. The world today runs a lot cashless, right? Like we depend on credit card and debit card transactions. I mean, I carry a phone, I have 4 cards in it and a wallet. I don't even carry a wallet where I have space for cash anymore, right? And those systems are core to kind of everything we do today. Probably the coffee that you bought this morning, and the food staples, electricity, the things that make our lives run. In the hour that we'll be talking here today, in excess of 100 million debit and credit card transactions will be processed worldwide. They're totally core to our economy today and to how we all live. And this is what's at stake every day for global payments, right? And you're gonna hear from them today. Ganesh is gonna talk to you about how they power the systems that enable your credit and my credit and debit card transactions to run successfully. So, go back, sorry. Welcome, I hope you're enjoying reInvent. And thank you for joining myself and one of my favorite customers, Ganesh Samaskandan, Vice President of Digital Experiences Technologies at Global Payments, to hear about how Global Payments has modernized their payment processing systems from Mainframe to AWS. My name is Stephen Clark. I'm going to try not to touch my mic. And I am the Director of Support and Technical Account Management at AWS. I basically, for our global financial services customers. So I work with our largest banks, insurance companies, hedge funds, asset managers, exchanges, payment processors, credit providers, and all of the systems, the technology services that basically build the foundation of financial services. Now, if you're anything like my customers, you're either running mission critical workloads on AWS today, or you have plans to do that in the near future. So we're gonna talk today about how AWS support can help you successfully migrate and operate those applications on AWS. So it's not just about credit cards. I spend a lot of time in credit cards and banks and online banking, right? But another quick show of hands, I'd love to hear from folks or see from folks in the room, who of you today are running production apps on AWS? So keep your hands up if those production applications are what you would consider like the mission critical kind of crown jewels of your business. So we still have a lot of hands up, right? 6.5 years ago when I started at AWS, and you can put your hands down now, thank you very much. 6.5 years ago when I started at AWS, particularly with my customers, which are kind of larger global legacy financial institutions, The number of hands that would have gone up for the first question would have been okay. The number of hands that would have stayed up for that second question, not a lot, right? Today, it's a world of difference, right? Today, airlines are running ticketing systems and their operations on AWS. Healthcare companies are conducting drug discovery on AWS. Media companies are streaming things like the Super Bowl, World Cups on AWS to tens of millions of users, right? And retailers are running their whole e-commerce platforms on AWS. So Black Friday, Cyber Monday that just happened, a ton of that traffic is running through AWS the whole time, right? In my world in financial services, we're no longer not running those mission critical workloads on AWS. We're running things like trading applications. We're running exchanges on AWS. We're running payment processing on AWS. If you have an online banking app, there's a good chance that it's running on AWS, right? And those are the kinds of systems that really can't go down. So when they go down, they have real impacts to all of us in our daily lives. We have government agencies running on AWS, right? It could be life or death. It could just impact our ability for our financial markets to run. So the stakes are high. When things go wrong, people can't buy homes. They can't make trades. They can't access the money in their bank accounts, right? Even if accessing that money is all about getting some cash out to gamble at the casino today. Let's talk a little bit about how we keep these types of critical systems running. So at AWS, we've been working backwards from what our customers need. That's our whole methodology. We're customer obsessed. In the old days, as customers move from, let's say, cloud native startups to more larger enterprises that were running on AWS, you told us that you needed faster response times and you needed help using our services. So we launched AWS Enterprise Support, right? It gave us the ability to respond in 15 minutes to requests that you had or challenges that you were facing for your production workloads. And it also gave us the ability to provide proactive guidance on using our services, making your applications more resilient, making them perform better, making them more secure, making yourselves more operationally excellent, and saving costs, right? Now, it was a little over 5 years ago, I was talking to one of those large media streaming companies about how they could bring their streaming platform onto AWS. And they asked me, the executive in the room asked me a question. He said, why can't you just see what I see? Why do I have to open a case to you at all in the first place? Right? So back in 2022, we launched a service called AWS Incident Detection and Response. And this allows us to ingest alarms directly from your observability platforms, right? So whether you're using CloudWatch or you're using other third-party platforms or your own platforms that you build, and to respond using predefined runbooks within 5 minutes of those alarms going off. Now, that application-specific help was super helpful for when incidents happen. But you also wanted help for pre-planned events. And when one of our largest financial services customers was looking to move their contact center, so you call in to get help from the bank, and you call in and they wanted to move to Amazon Connect, they wanted help in making sure that when they made that move, they were going to be successful, right? And they wanted to bring in expertise beforehand. So 2 years ago, we launched Countdown Premium, which was a service to provide that critical event planning and live event support, right? It allows us to bring in experts from the services that you're using. So in this case, this example, it was Connect experts who could work with the customer beforehand. They understood other customers, the problems that they had run into over the last several years, and help them avoid those beforehand, and then manage the go live, right? So we've come a long way, but you all continue to ask us for more, especially as you're moving your critical workloads to AWS. A few of those things that you're asking for, there's basically 3 main targets, and it still sits in the same buckets. Number 1 is we'd like to never have a problem. I think a lot of people think of support as a break-fix kind of tool, right? But what our customers would really like to have is never have that problem in the first place. So how do we help them avoid those problems? Number 2, when those are problems that we don't foresee inevitably do happen, how do we respond to them and solve them as quickly as possible, right? And to do that, it's about shifting our model. Like, we want to be recognizing that problem as early as you are, right? Back to the question from the customer who asked, why can't we see what you see, right? And reduce that time to detection and then time to resolution. And then third, when we respond, let's respond with something meaningful, right? There's nothing worse than you have a problem, you reach out, and then the request back is someone has zero context to what you're doing. So how can we bring the context of your workload in your business to the problem that we're trying to solve? So we've taken that feedback on. And over the last 12 months, we've been working with customers like Global Payments and running a pilot to help them move and then operate their most important mission-critical workloads on AWS with a new AWS support service. And today, we launched that support service. So we've gone generally available with the AWS Support's Unified Operations Plan. So what we heard from customers when you're running your entire businesses on AWS is that the traditional support models weren't enough for your mission-critical workloads, right? So with Unified Operations, we kind of change the model. And we turn it from a support plan into an integrated operational model between your operations teams and ours, right? And with that, you get a dedicated team of AWS experts who become an extension of your team. And those folks help prevent problems before they happen. They provide recommendations on your application architectures. They help you figure out what are the failure modes that you're going to run into. Figure out what's the observability that you need in place to recognize that those failure modes are going to happen. And then design what are those response plans that we're going to have jointly when we do fail, and we need to resolve those problems as quickly as possible. They're going to build custom run books for those scenarios, and they're going to test them with you, right? Then they're going to help you for the events that you can foresee, plan for those events to make sure that they're successful. And for the events that we don't foresee, the incidents that we inevitably run into, they're going to use that context and that knowledge and those custom run books that they've developed with you to respond to those problems quickly and make sure that you get out of trouble as quickly as possible. So if you're running your business on AWS, Unified Operations was built for you. But you don't really want to hear from me. Let me welcome to the stage Ganesh Samaskandan to tell you how he and his team have leveraged Unified Operations at Global Payments and how it has helped them migrate and operate their mission-critical applications successfully on AWS. Ganesh, off to you.
Thank you, Stephen. You are able to hear me? Okay. By the way, Stephen, the transaction that it was not working, it was the planned one because I want you to be here with me. So we just used one of our microservices to just turn off the card controls. So that's how it worked. By the way, I'm Ganesh from Global Payments, and in order to give us who we are the number one issuer processor in US, UK, Canada, Ireland, and China. We process around 75 plus billion transactions, and out of that, I would say 35 plus billions of transactions from our issuing organization. We operate across 100 plus countries, and as Stephen was saying, it's pretty much ours are mission critical applications. To give more glimpse about what specifically, when you go into your home, you get the mailbox, where you will see that there will be a browser where you can apply for the credit card. That's where our life cycle of the payment starts. We take care of for our issuing clients where we process those kind of the application processing, which we call it as account originations. And from there, the journey starts. Either you want to host an application where you can do the real-time approval of your card approvals, then you get the card. You have to really how you get the card. That's again as a issuer organization, we take care of printing the cards or embedding the PIN. It includes all the encryption algorithm and everything. That's we take care of for our issuing clients. It not only it starts there, we continue our journey. You go and swipe your credit cards, and then you get into your own online banking transactions, or we do have the B2C and B2B application. So it's kind of we touches the life cycle of the payments in every phases of it. I still remember 15 years before when I went into the one of the, we call it as a concept you can have the tour on our facilities where you will see our printer never stops. Like it goes around like 24/7. We keep printing the credit cards, we keep printing the statements, and the new letters, the cards, and everything. It goes out. The reason I'm saying is like how critical our applications and why we need the unified operations. That's why it is. Even during the Thanksgiving or the holidays, like the last couple of days when I was watching like how big is our transactions, we processed around like 1.5 billion transactions in a day on the Thanksgiving and the holiday weekend. So that's how it is. So to give you the more on our cloud platform vision, we obviously we started our journey back in 2020, just before that. With all our clients, we are live in on-prem and in production. We have to make a careful consideration like how we want our cloud transformation and the basic. Our ideas are very simple and very basic in the sense like we want to make sure we offer the speed to market. At the same time, like we want our customers and the clients, they feel comfortable with that, particularly like when you talk about the cloud. We established our uniform control planes, and we wanted to make sure like we have the different cloud integration patterns, and we chose AWS as one of our preferred partners. I want to spend some time on how we did on the mainframe authorization platform. So as you see here, like it is our flagship platform, the high throughput and low latency platform. That's like a very crucial with the 3.6 plus billion transactions processed monthly and the 100 plus clients supported. To emphasize more on how this authorization works. The moment like you go and swipe your credit card, it goes through the schemes. And then like from the schemes, like then it comes to the issuer who we are. Then it is like our expectation is that we have to take care of that everything in fraction of milliseconds. Obviously, like if you and me, any one of us, like we spend time like an hour to spend time on picking up the right thing in the store, but we don't have the patience in the front of the counter. Like if the transaction doesn't go through even for a fraction of a second, then we start raising our eyebrows. We look at the POS terminal, what the hell is going on, right? So no one has any patience anymore, but we have to take care of that. So that authorization is such a heart of the system where you have to take care of whether you are the right person. That's where like our services like the fraud and the risk scores and all the analysis comes into the picture. We need to make sure like you are coming from the proper, the same channel, or you are doing it in from the different geolocation. So like that, like I can name it as like a 30 plus different checkpoints when you have the authorization. And we don't have any luxury of taking our time. It has to happen in milliseconds. If not, even we are looking for in today's payment industry with the high penalties and the delays and all. For all of that, we need to have the better observability and we need to have the good metrics. So when we start looking into our modernized authorization platform, our platform goals, it's basically like we want to make sure we are having auto-scaling and reselling architecture with a multi-region deployment with high availability. Our clients are across, as I said, like across the location, so we got to make sure like we are offering that wherever they are closer to the region, we need to make sure we are offering our modernized auth platform. Security. Every one of us, it's a pretty standard one, right? Like when you go and talk to the clients, like, hey, I'm going to put your payment system in the cloud. The first thing is like, are you going to take care of? How can you make sure? Tokenization, green zone, red zone, and how are you going to take care of that? So we take care of that that's the basic principle, one of our foundation. The next one is like the multiple geographics and the regulatory environments. Nowadays, like with the more enforcement on the local regulations, we have to keep that in mind when we start designing our modernized platform. SaaS enablement. I want to spend a time. I know like the magical word of the SaaS comes like pretty much like the last few years, people interpret it in different ways. But if I have to really go back to our legacy way of doing it, it's not that simple. For every client, we are talking about 100 plus clients, and you are not going to have like 100 different code base. Then it becomes a nightmare for you. For that, like we do have to take care of like our configurations are taken care in the real time, and we make sure that our modernized systems can follow that and it can offer that service. It can go to the simple situations like where you need to change your configuration. In the olden ways, you may have to ask the customer, They may need to submit the form, it goes through your change request or go through that, but with the SaaS-based, we were able to bring up like making use of the services offered by the AWS and everything. So you can, in real time, you can really like refresh your cache so that your configurations can come in live. And the marketplace capability with plugin solutions. That's obviously like one of our key components, because nowadays, like if you are not into the marketplace, then you are kind of like outdated. So here is our, after all those ones, our cloud-based authorization. I want to see, like when I say like the 5K plus transaction per second on the new auth platform, if you remember, like in the previous slide, I mentioned that our today's transaction per second is close to 2,500 to 3,000 transaction per second. But we don't want to keep it as our baseline. We want to really like scale up that. So our goal was like to keep it as like 5K plus transactions with our new cloud-based platform. The overall SLA, as I said, like we want to keep it under the 200 milliseconds with multi-region high availability architecture. You see, like on the rightmost services, like we moved towards more into the microservices world, where we added like the value-added services. We split each and every processing of the authorizations, like the fraud as a separate platform, risk platform, digital call, and everything on that. Obviously, we support like consumer and commercial platforms, and we got to make sure that we are not going back into the big fat monolithic way. So the authorization multi-region architecture, as you see here, like that the top ones are the schemes, whether you have it as the MasterCard or Visa or the debit networks. And the main thing you see here, like some of our AWS services, like take it for example, like the Dynamo GB. That's for managing all our transaction data. We decided to go with the one. And when we talk about the client configurations, like we wanted to keep it with Amazon RDS. There are plenty of client configurations that we need to take care of for the authorization stuff. And obviously, everyone knows the MSK is for the event relevant pieces. We do have we ended up with creating the synthetic failover regions, where you can see like we have the global table replica on that slides, and in order to detect. But moreover, you have all of these, but the main thing is like you need to have the good control of your failure patterns and your observability. That's where you see here is like we have all our design, everything was put in best place. We know like that is kind of like going to take care of for our customers. However, we want to make sure like, okay, the code is ready, but how are we really ready for the production consumption? The challenge we had is like we have several hundred clients. They are today in our on-prem solution. They know it is very stable. That's why they are with us for like several years. And they know our baseline, that how our systems are performing. So we got to make sure we are giving that confidence, and so that like both client and as an organization, we march towards our modernization journey. The proactive guidance. So what it is basically, we don't want to think like, okay, we have a great system, right? We have been very transparent, and we want to take advantage of like, okay, here is our architecture. What do you think? Like, so we approach like AWS, like, okay, how do you see? Do you see like anything we need to adjust, or we need to shift anything? Because you are talking about like the high volume, high scalable, and high throughput system. So we need to make sure that we have that. So proactive guidance is one of the things. Architecture review. That's like absolutely like we spend a lot of time, and it is a big thing, right? When you talk about the architecture review, it starts from your design, and it goes all the way through your NFR, or your how are you planning your failovers and everything. We did spend time on failure mode analysis, where we have to do like the hard and gray liners, and also like we have the AWS designed specialist engineers, where they looked into our way of how we laid out our components and everything. The alarms and observability, again, is like one of the best things. We all experience this in our everyday day-to-day activity, where we go and just configure like different alarms, but you don't want several thousands of alarms for no reason just because it's alarm. So we want to make sure like we pick the right alarms, which is really an alarm. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of it. So there we have to really spend time on how we want to really go and define based on their experience with their other customers, and they were able to really collaborate with us. The test detection and response, I will cover that in the word, but it's kind of like a joint tabletop exercise where we did with comparing about how we have our systems versus like specifically for each of our microservices. In the nutshell, the unified operations, it delivers the concrete outcomes. Our key 4 pillars were like observability, the shared response planning, testing, and the planned event strategies. It is basically like, if we talk about the observability, again, as I said, I want to reemphasize that identify and adjusted the noisy alarms. And we don't want to really trigger the alarms, and also if it is the real alarm, we don't want to really stop that, or we don't want to keep putting it as an alarm. We want to make sure like we are not repeating that, and how can we prevent that? We all talked about the RCAs and everything, but there is the good advantage of using the unified operations plan is like where you will get more visibility into how can you really prevent those kind of the incidents in the future. The planned event strategies were like, we all know that like in our microservices and in our container platform, we always have to really get into the multiple patches, but you cannot afford to have like that too, particularly in the authorization system or anything. You cannot have like a downtime or anything. So we want to make sure like we have the zero downtime patching and also the insights on the edge conditions. So resilient operations about the disruptions. We had the critical workload review. Obviously, like we did that before we went and said to our client like, hey, our product is ready, now it is ready for the consumption. We want to make sure we have the proper security, resiliency, performance, and observability. The next one is on the day of disruption. We defined what we want really on the day of the disruption. Obviously, you cannot avoid the disruption, but you need to have the better game plan like how is your MTTR? How are you going to take care when situation happens? That's what we defined like our engagement is like less than 2 minutes with the AWS team. And we want to make sure like any of the service disruption, we are getting like before our client calls us, we want to make sure like our systems, we have the good hands in our systems. The results, obviously it's not like any magic thing. So we were able to do like avoid the financial impact. We were able to maintain the trust and reputation. That's most important nowadays in the industry, and confirmation of the resilient architecture and the operations. I want to spend some time on a real-time example, right? I know, like I said, like yes, we use this, it's great and everything, but let's talk about like a situation where we had a major EKS clusters where we have to upgrade like almost 100 plus EKS containers that we need to, I think if I remember, like it was like 1.3 to 1.31. And all those applications were like really the mission critical applications with the high volume throughput. During that project execution, before we go into production at the last minute, we ran into the situation where certain core DNS, we ran into that trouble. And what we did is like with this engagement, we were able to really get the AWS team because, as I said, like in our previous slides, they know about our complete architecture pattern. They know like each and every dots into our system. So when we engaged our specialists from our architects and the leads and the AWS team, we were able to quickly get into like what is happening. It was like a quite challenging one because it was not happening across the core DNS parts, but it was happening on very specific one. They kind of like quickly ruled out each and every layer. The way they did the triaging was kind of like ruling out like, okay, this is not in routing on the DNS one, or it is not in like any other the components. So they were able to really drill down in the short notice because of the fact they were involved from the day one on our architecture and the design. So with the domain specialist providing the guidance, like we were able to quickly resolve that, I would say, and we were able to really save the overall commitment timelines. The reason I'm saying is like that's how like the context aware AWS expect engagement. That's really the crucial. Otherwise, we know about that, like we will start our understanding, we start reviewing that when the situation comes. That's kind of like the reactive mode than the proactive mode. The results, we were able to successfully upgrade those 100 plus EKS clusters. We never had like any production impact or the down, and we were able to keep up our commitments to our customers, and we maintained our business continuity with that part. But everything fails, right? So what we do is like we have like enough indicators. We had the actual incidents, and we have the less than 2-minute engagement, efficient problem solving and issue management. But what we started doing is like we have almost, I would say, 35 plus alarms in the last, since we started this engagement. But out of those 35 plus alarms, there were like only 7, it becomes as an incident. And those 7 also, how I would say is like we were able to really quickly identify, and they were able to implement as part of the RCA review process, that we were able to improve those alarms and the indicators. When I say that part, what it means is like in certain occasions, like we know the pattern, and we can go and implement like the auto healing mechanisms in such a way that if the same thing happens, let's say for example that EKS container, if the connection loses, you don't need really like someone has to call you and then like tell like the one. So instead of that, you can have this automation so that in such a way those can re-establish the connection. So there you can save like the potential impacts to your business. We keep updating our GPN and the AWS runbooks. That's very crucial, obviously, like because whenever you start introducing any new component or the new systems, we make sure that we go through again like all the process in such a way that our playbook is always ready, so that like you are not figuring it out what to do when those kind of disruption occurs. The workload reviews is again another important pieces, as in today's industry, like we keep expanding the client base, the volume goes unexpected or anything. So we want to make sure like how is our workload with respect to our scalability feature. The results with all of that, we had the great operations excellence, improved the team efficiency and customer experience and risk management. So this is one. So I know like I gave you the one. So let's just rewind the clock without our unified operations. So during the early days when we had our one of our critical clients, we put them in the cloud for one of our processing. Everything was great, right? Like it was absolutely phenomenal, because obviously the client is in AWS and we were in AWS. Our microservices, everything was great, no issues with response time or any latencies, everything fine. But one fine day, suddenly there was an issue, and then like they said like there is, they are not getting any API response back. There was no alarm, there is nothing like really anything. That reminds me like we all know like how our production triaging, if you don't really have the proper tools to your team, if you don't have the proper observability, we all know how our incident management goes, right? Our team will get into the phone call, then they will say like, oh, everything is perfect in my side. Then you call the next microservice, or you call the next layer of system. So you kind of like start identifying where the problem itself, you are talking about like multiple hours or anything. Everyone says like, it was great in my system, the same thing, right? So the same thing, like I was like literally I was watching like when we were doing this troubleshooting, it was like during those, I think it's fun to remember during my school days, we used to have like the small television. It's like a microwave. You will have the digital knob. However, like your television or your channel, you won't see it properly. It depends on multiple conditions, right? If there is like a heavy wind, then you will start seeing the frequency fluctuation. You will immediately you will go and run onto the top of the floor, you change the antenna cable or you shake the cable, then you come down. It may work or it may not work. That's how the triaging happens during those days. You don't know like what is the root cause, but by the time like you finish up all these different triaging, the program will end. That's how like the situation is when you have the incident. If you don't have really like the proper support and the architecture and the reviews, then you are going to be in the same situation. That's why you see here is like we had like 9 hours to identify where the root cause was on the day, because if it is on the code, obviously you have the smart people. You will obviously know that. Or if it is on the what. But when you have the kind of the complexity, like with the multiple components and everything, you need to plan it out well. That's why it is. With the unified operations, we had the same situation. After we established that collaboration with the AWS, we were able to have those MSK Connect alarm triggers, and it took like 2 minutes. Overall, you see is like that the context of our engineering team, like it's a 10-minute stuff, and we were able to identify the resource and the issue resolved. We didn't stop right there. We had the continuous improvement where we work with them. If the same pattern, if the same thing happens, you don't need any involvement. You just go and the system takes care of it, the process takes care of it automatically. That's how like you get the quality of life for your teams, and that's the very crucial thing. With the unified operations and automated migrations, we were able to automate the mitigations, context-aware AWS engagement to confirm impact the mitigation plan, and we spread that across our systems. We don't really stop in one place. As we keep evolving in our modernization journey, we showcase our success, and then we go and implement that in our multiple work streams. So that's how it is. Straightforward, yeah. Thank you.
So you've heard a little bit about Global Payments' journey and how they were able to bring their payment processing systems onto AWS. I want to take this back and we'll talk about how unified operations treats basically the whole approach and the plan as a way to implement a resilience, what we launched back in 2023, which was our resilience lifecycle framework, and build specific engagements that we can run with customers to make sure that this isn't a best efforts basis, right? We have a program around ensuring that your most critical workloads are going to move and operate successfully on AWS. So the first piece of that with a lot of customers is figuring out what are those critical applications. So in Ganesh's case, Global Payments had some applications, and they knew that, hey, this mainframe, this payment processing system, this authorization system, this is super critical. And how do we define that? Well, we're going to tier our applications, and we're going to know what are the business and technical requirements of that application in terms of resiliency. So what is the recovery point objective? What's the recovery time objective? First and foremost, before we can make sure that an application is resilient, we need to know how resilient it needs to be, right? So that's the first question that we ask. And that's setting those objectives for the app. Now, normally our customers do that independently a lot of the time. The point of unified operations is to work with you all to figure out which are those applications that matter the most. Let's prioritize those. And then let's go through this process that we showed with Global Payments for those apps that you want to focus on, right? So once you know which your most important applications are, then it's time to design and implement. And maybe you've done this already, right? So in the case of Global Payments, they knew that this system basically couldn't go down. The recovery time had to be like instantaneous, which meant that for their architecture, they were going to be active across 2 regions, right? And that's a choice that you make. But there's an architectural component of that, and then there's an operational component of it, right? So we want to design for those requirements that we have, and we want to implement against those. And what unified operations helps us do is, as you do that design, we bring in and run what we call a critical workload review. So this is where we bring the specialist from our side in the services that you're using for the particular application. So in the case of the payment system, we brought in some EKS specialists, right? And they did that critical workload review, and they analyzed how Global Payments was using EKS and what things we've seen ourselves across our customers as we've worked with them, not just designing, but operating on EKS over time. And we made some recommendations in 2 main areas, but one was helping identify edge cases and potential failure modes that Global Payments could run into. And the second was in how we respond to those. So it's really resiliency and then the response to those scenarios. It also meant designing and implementing not just the right architecture, but the right capabilities to operate and meet those RTO requirements. So if we go back to the event that no one's ever heard of, I'm sure, but what happened 2 months ago on October 20th of this year, we had a lot of customers that had actually architected for multi-region to be able to withstand the event, but they hadn't practiced the operational aspects of how they were actually going to fail over from one region to another, right? And so they ran into that trouble while they were going to fail over. So implementing is not just the architecture, it's also the operational side of things. Global payments did, of course, so they were fine. So the third piece is, once we've designed and implemented, now we need to evaluate and test. So what we're doing in unified operations is we've figured out that we've made recommendations around the architecture itself and your operations, but now we're going to go through and we're going to, for each of those failure modes that we've identified, provide recommendations on what's the right alarming, working together with the customer, what's the right alarming to put in place so that we're going to be able to see that these failure modes, we're going to run into them, right? And then how do we respond, right? So number one is set up the alarms, and number two is figure out what we're going to do when those alarms go off. Ganesh mentioned this, but one of the biggest challenges that we've had with customers is they have like lots of metrics and observability in place, right? Lots of metrics, lots of logs, lots of traces. It's very hard to see through all that. And when we first started doing this with one of our first pilot customers, they were bringing a trading database on, and they had hundreds of metrics that were coming in and alarms that they were receiving. And the idea of the service is, if those alarms are the ones that are the most important business signals, which is what they were telling us, then we should be like all happy that that alarm goes off and we page people and we start troubleshooting that incident. But what happened instead was, alarm goes off and we're paging people and they're like, why are you calling me? And I'm like, well, you told us that that alarm was the one that mattered, right? All 200 of them. What we had to do was go into those alarms and really define business critical alarms that we wanted to look at. So reduce that noise and give us a signal, right? And that's exactly what we did with global payments, so that we could set up the right alarms and set up some synthetic canaries, a number of different alarms that allowed us to see what was really happening in those applications. So once we had those alarms identified, now the question is, okay, great, what are we going to do, right? And there's a piece on the customer side, right? But when you're operating on AWS, the other piece is on our end. And we have a support model that's in place, but what we want to do is have a joint operational model that's going to make sure that we're successful. So as Ganesh mentioned, with the scenario that they ran into, when they had an issue, where our teams already had the context and we knew, okay, when this alarm goes off for this particular application, we know that that application uses these underlying AWS services in this region. We understand that architecture. We know, so we can do a few things. Number one, we can quickly look and correlate that with what's going on the AWS end. So we can look at what's happening with our services internally, what's happening with your experience with those services. Number two, we can parallelize an investigation that often ends up sequential. So you saw on the previous slide that sequential investigation that we did in the first case, where we looked at ELB first and then we were like, oh, it's not ELB, let's go to Lambda, right? Bottom line is, if we know all the services that you're using, then we can initiate those parallelized investigations all at once, so that instead of waiting for one to be ruled out, we rule them out together in parallel, right? So we do those two things. And then the third thing is, how do we engage you as a customer where you are and where you run your incidents? So most of you have, particularly a lot of the big firms that I work with, they have like major incident management processes. And they want us to engage in a certain way to deal with certain incidents. Some teams have, app-specific incident management. Like they manage their apps independently, right? And we want to engage with the right people. So we have custom runbooks that we're able to basically set up for each of those scenarios with the customer. So once we have those set up, we don't want to be using them for the first time when an incident happens, right? And this is what Ganesh mentioned. We don't want to be, like, it's great to do all this work up front, but then if we do that work up front and then The first time that you have an issue and that we test any of the stuff that we built is when you actually have a problem during a large-scale event or during a, whatever it may be. Then we're going to run into all those kinks at the time. So we do a lot of game day testing ahead of time to make sure that we can basically test each one of those failure modes and make sure that we can respond in the right way. What we've also done, and what we saw with customers who did really well during the recent event, was it's not just kind of tabletop testing, but also using services like our fault injection service for chaos testing or resilience testing, and having a continuous testing mechanism where we engage together to run those experiments and then respond to them and build the right runbooks to be successful. So once we've tested, let's go forward instead of backward. Once we've tested, the next phase is to operate, right? And there's kind of two pieces. One is where we can plan for what's going to happen, right? And so pre-planned events, those are your zero downtime upgrades, right? You know you need to do this thing. You know there's a time frame in which this thing needs to happen. It needs to happen successfully. We work together. We bring in experts. And here what we do is you have a dedicated team that's working with the customer. So we have dedicated folks that work with global payments. But when a customer, when you have an event that maybe needs a different set of resources, so needs expertise in a different area. So the example that I gave before about a customer that's migrating a contact center now, we bring in those additional experts from those services, and they're able to help with that migration. In the case of global payments, this meant bringing in our EKS experts and making sure that they could upgrade those clusters successfully, right? Then the second piece is the piece that we never want to run into, but that always happens, is the unplanned events, right? And in these cases, we've tried to map out every potential scenario that we could have run into, and we've built those response plans. And we're responding to those events now because, number one, we're getting alarms we're ingesting them directly from you as a customer, right? So we don't have to wait for you to open a support case in the console or via the API to tell us, hey, you have an issue. We're actually getting those alarms directly as you're getting them. When we get them, we have that custom runbook in that context to look at. So we immediately can look at what's happening with our own services and come to a call and engage you within 5 minutes, and that's the promise of unified operations, and be able to tell you within those 5 minutes, hey, we know alarm A went off for this service that you're running. We know that alarm uses, that your service uses these AWS services in this region, and we know that, hey, we're investigating an impact with one of these services over here, or we're not, and we think the problem might be on your side, and now you've ruled out the fact that it could be an AWS problem. Right? And now we can stay with you and investigate through what are the third-party dependencies that you've taken, what's going on in your own configuration end or with your own code, and help you solve those problems. What we've seen with customers so far is much like what we saw with global payments. So you saw that scenario. We had the first scenario. It took us like 9 hours to figure out the root cause of the issue. In the second case, we were able to basically dial that down to 10 minutes, right, to solve the problem. The average customer in our private preview that's been going on until today saw about a 50% increase in mean time to resolution for issues once they onboarded to unified operations. Then the last piece is the piece that Ganesh talked about at the end, which is, whether it's a mundane failure or a very large event, the thing that actually I get most excited about at Amazon is we have this very rigorous correction of errors process, or what we call our COE process, right? It's a blameless COE process. And respond and learn is all about that process. How do we take what went wrong and how do we learn from it to make sure that that thing never happens again? And so what we do specifically within unified operations is we convert this process into basically a post-incident review of any incident that we have, whether planned or unplanned, right? And what we want to do there is, A, if we can, give you architecture recommendations so that you can just never see the problem again, right? That's the ideal scenario. Problem never happens. But if we can't fully do that, or there's a cost implication of doing that, or whatever the case may be that makes it so that that's not exactly the solution that you want to take. What are we going to do to detect the problem faster? So did you actually not have an alarm set up? Did we miss this in all of our original onboarding and kind of analysis? And what's left is, hey, we didn't have an alarm for that, and so we had to open up a case. Took us an hour to figure out that we needed to open a case, so okay, let's put an alarm in place to cover this scenario. Did you have an alarm, but the alarm threshold was set so loose because you were worried about too much noise, and so you didn't actually, trigger the alarm. You were capturing the metric, but it was set at the wrong threshold. So we can improve alarms in that way. Did we have the right runbook? So did we know who to contact, or were we contacting the wrong person and getting shuttled around to solve the problem? Did we have the correct architecture? Did we have an updated version of your architecture so that we were looking at the right underlying services? Or did we take too long trying to triage because we found out that, hey, you used to use EKS and you moved to something else, and we didn't know that, right? And we can update both on your end, what you can do from an architectural standpoint, from an observability standpoint, from a runbook standpoint, and then on our end, what we can do in terms of ingesting alarms and updating our runbooks to make sure that we can close that loop. And that's the most important part, that we close the loop and we make sure that you're continuously driving improvement and getting better over time. So in summary, Unified Operations is all about us helping you drive operational excellence, particularly for your mission-critical workloads at enterprise scale. It starts with, let's avoid those events in the first place. So giving you the right level of proactive guidance with experts in the services that you're using and people who know your business to make sure that you avoid those problems in the first place and that you have the right mechanisms to set up to respond to them. 2, when things do happen, make sure that we have the right alerts in place and that we're responding in 5 minutes with context-aware folks who can actually help you solve the problem and not just shuttle you around to other people, right? So that's the second piece. We didn't talk about it here, but we actually do the same thing with security. So if you're a user of guard duty, we do the same thing in the security space as we do in operational incidents. So a lot of our customers, they actually get tons and tons of guard duty alerts or other third-party systems, right? And triaging through those and figuring out what is the one security alert that we actually need to dive into is what our team does. And then we have security incident responders that respond to those events, and we'll run you through those events as well, just like we do for operational incidents. And then the last piece is that continuous improvement. On top of this, in terms of improving the resiliency and the operations of your workloads, Unified Operations also gives you designated resources in the cost space to look at your entire spend, workload specific, but also across your entire environment, and give you recommendations on how to improve those costs as well. Now, just to wrap up, a lot of this is about, how do we build the right processes and people, and what are the technologies that we're putting in place? I think in the background, Support is a heavy user of AI, actually, and we actually are using, if you're not aware of this, we're using it all the time. And we have developed AI agents to do this. And for normal case management, our processes, we have this robust corpus of millions of cases that we've used to build assistance for our teams to better respond to cases that you open. What Unified Operations does is it gives us a whole other set of data, right, that allows us to build agents that are tailored to your particular workloads to give those recommendations to our users. And that's what we'll see over time is more and more improvements in the roadmap in what we deliver to you using that custom data and those AI agents that we've already developed, but keeping those humans in the loop that are providing that expertise and making sure that we're driving to resolution. With that, it's literally day one for Unified Operations. So we say this all the time at Amazon. If you're not aware, it's day one. It's literally day one. We launched this morning, so I'm very excited. But if you all have questions, please feel free to come up, reach out to me. Come come and talk to Ganesh, or stop by the support booth number 50.